right? So like when you select the leadership lesson, I feel like there's a lot of work before you teach. You have to understand it yourself. What are some of the processes that you went through when you were first when you went through a leadership lesson, or you were going to teach a leadership lesson, especially from the Habitudes book?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you want to find one that's going to resonate with yourself, like one that you identify with. But then also you got to be thinking through who you're going to be speaking to, right? Is this going to make sense? Is this going to make sense? And does this actually apply to their lives right now? So you're thinking through like the context, right? You're thinking through who you're actually speaking to. You're not just like, oh, I like this idea, but is this going to benefit the people who are hearing?
I think one of my main things when I'm thinking about a presentation, or really any kind of involvement with students, I always think like, what do I want the students to get? And it's similar to that. Like what, and I actually fill in the blank to this question, which is if you're successful in teaching students the leadership lesson, when they leave the room, they will what? Right? They will learn what? They will want to do what? They will believe what? They will do what? Like, what do you want them to do or think or believe after they leave? You know, like if you did your job correctly, what is that end result? Because if you start there, so for example, you know, today I'm teaching a lesson on the hot air balloon, right? So I'm teaching at the TLC Thrive. My end result, when the students leave, if I did my job right with the movie that I presented to them, right, the presentation, then when they leave there, they will want to encourage more people. But specifically, I'm going to give them the challenge of encouraging 3 other people in their lives that have given a lot to them. So like literally, if they don't encourage 3 other people in their lives, like then I didn't do my job, right? Because that's my outcome. That's what I'm heading towards. And everything that I do is geared towards that end result. From the team builder, from even the energizer, the icebreaker, like everything is geared towards like that main focus, that very concrete end result. So I would make sure that like that's the number one thing before you even start anything else, right? You pick a presentation based on like this is why, because I want students to gain this. You know, I would even say like maybe a good thing might be is like when even before you guys pick the 3. You know, like I don't know this. I'm just thinking out loud. Like even before they pick the 3, they say what's most important for students to learn in our club. Like what do we want them to gain most? Like if we can only teach them one thing, what would we want to teach them?
Yeah.
And maybe they can kind of define their outcome, and then look at the lessons and say, do one of these like is kind of, you know, could we tweak one, or is one directly tied to this outcome?
Right.
Because then that means that they're in consensus. They're like passionate about this one outcome.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that that kind of going along with that, one of the main things that's so important is to keep it simple. To keep like So
yes.
When I first started giving presentations, you know, often they'd be so complicated. They'd be all over the place and talking about, oh, I could teach them this, I could teach them this. I'm trying to teach all these different things. But then you probably know this, when there's 10 different points, you're not going to remember any of them.
Right.
So eventually we started even just having one sentence, right? Like one tagline almost, one sentence that we say over and over and over again. And everything from the whole presentation has to do with that. So I'm just trying to think of one. One tagline we have.
Like beat the dip. You know, we've had this last year.
Right.
Beat the dip, or all in.
Yeah.
You know, be all in. You know, be a thermostat, not a thermostat, not a thermometer.
Not a thermometer.
Yeah.
Right. And so it all comes back to that one thing. So there's this KISS, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, stupid.
Hey, no cussing on these videos.
Sorry.
Come on.
Keep it stupid.
PG-13.
Keep it simple, silly. Yeah, I think that's the main thing, is whatever you're doing, it should have one small, very short sentence that you're trying to get across to them, and then everything that you're doing points back to that.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, so get your tagline, right? Like maybe so then your main focus should be like, okay, what's the one thing, the idea that they're going to go away with? I think that, and then repeat that idea over and over again throughout the presentation. You know, like
Yeah.
beat the dip. It's like, you know, it's in the beginning, it's the middle, and then it's the end. It's even at the breakout. So that way, like, students can remember that. Oh yeah, beat the dip, and this is what they remember from that.
Should we have some kiddos join us?
Yeah, let's
for the
have some
rest of
kiddos
this?
join us.
All right. Can you say hello? Say hi.
What's your name?
What's your name?
Say hello to the camera.
Okay, we'll just sit there. We're going to talk for a little bit, okay? I'm going to talk with Johan, okay? All right.
So we're talking about the presentation. So the very first thing you should do is think about the end, or begin with the end in mind, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
think about what is the outcome, what do you want students to gain from the whole presentation,
Yeah.
and maybe once you've deliberated and wrestled with what you want, you should have like a tagline, like something
Yep.
that you're going to repeat throughout the conference or throughout the presentation that students are going to remember.
Yeah, another thing that comes to mind, and this is something that you always reminded me of, is the power of telling personal stories.
Yeah.
You know, don't just give principles. Principles are really good, but make sure that you are sharing, like, where's the emotional component, right? Like,
Right.
what's going to actually hook people, what's actually going to impact them is stories.
Yeah.
Because we're story-formed people, right? So,
Absolutely.
so how does this lesson apply to your life? And what are some examples you can share of, different stories from your life?
Yeah. You know, when I was thinking, I had a breakdown of made the presentation, and this isn't all the all be all, right? Like, there's other ways to do this, but usually when I think about presentation, I think about like the introduction, almost like a paper, like the introduction where you grab their attention. Like, literally, the introduction is the main goal of the introduction is to like get them interested and wondering, and there's so many ways you could do that. The next is the main point, right? So like, what's the main thing you're trying to say to them, and then the last part is the call to action. So what is it that they want them to do, to think, to change, to improve, and then even challenge them to go out and do those things. So in between all those things, I think you can start with a story. Like, and your introduction could literally be a story, and people are like, "Whoa, this is interesting," right? You could do a question. Like, I love doing questions in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, a good, intriguing question gets people thinking. You know what's a good one that I've done before is handing something out. Like, literally people giving something random to people. Like, I did a presentation on plant your seed.
Okay.
So where students would like think about like investing in things in their lives that are going to take time, but that eventually would bear good fruit.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I literally, before the presentation, I gave them the seed, each one of them, and they're like, what is this for?" I'm like, "You'll see." And they got,
That's good, I like
and they
that.
got them thinking, like, because what you want to do with the introduction is have them start wandering, right? Like, wondering, like, what's going on here? Like, get them a little bit at ease. I don't know. What are some other things, like, you know, do you agree with that, or is there other ways? Also presenting, maybe introducing the main point, but I feel like grabbing attention is so important.
Yeah,
in the
yeah. I mean, you
introduction.
almost don't want to give them too much at the beginning.
Mhm.
Like, if you just share all your main points. Now, oftentimes in a paper, they'll tell you to, kind of summarize your point and then flesh it out and summarize it again. You almost don't want to do that too much. You just want to, you almost want to give just enough to get people curious.
Yeah.
To where they're asking questions.
So be thoughtful by your introduction. Remember, grab their attention. The main point. There's so many things you could do just to teach the lesson. The way you want to do is you don't want to just tell them. You want to show them. Like, it's literally like writing a good paper, right? Like, you want to show them. You want to bring them in, and you want to have them develop the thought. Not you just tell them. Like, you could literally just tell them in 5 seconds, "Hey, this is a leadership lesson. Just go out and do it." But you got to show people. You got to bring them in, and skits is a wonderful way to do that, right?
Yeah.
You're a master of skits.
I mean, that's one that that always connects with students, because one, you have the humor, right? Like, it's funny, but also you're trying to recreate real life situations in these little skits. It also is just kind of opens up their brains a little bit, wakes them up a little bit when they see something different. So you're trying to look for different ways to communicate the same message, right? Whether it's a skit, whether that's maybe like a little video clip. We also use video clips. Whether that's asking a question, having them interact.
Yep.
You don't want to just you don't want it to be like just like a lecture, but you want it to be an experience that they have. You know.
I think about too like educate and entertain. Like like you need to have those two intertwined in through your presentation. Like you can't have too much entertainment because then there's no lesson, right? Like there's basically just kids having fun. But you need to have some educational moments. But it's like you need to weave them in together, and the skits do that perfectly. Because then you could do the skit, and then afterwards come in and say, "This is what the main point was," right?
Yeah.
Or this, like, did you guys pick this out? Or ask questions after the skit. I think that's so important because sometimes the skits, like, they're so funny, like that students miss the main point. So it's good that you need to come in and then educate after the entertainment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. 'Cause I think it is easy just to show the skit and assume that the lesson was caught, but that's not always the case. The debrief, the follow-up is one of the most important parts, where you're showing them what the skit actually meant and how it ties into the lesson. So.
So yeah, so there's skits, there's stories, as Coach Eric was talking about earlier. So there's stories. I mean, I love stories. I think, you know, a well-told story does both. It entertains and it educates, and it goes deep. Like people don't realize how powerful stories are. Like they go so deep inside of you, and literally years later, students will remember stories that you told them. They don't want to necessarily remember like all the other little things, but the stories that, you know, for some reason stick in your head. Really?
Yeah.
What's your favorite story?
So the thing about stories is you're gonna have some stories in the Habitudes books, and you're more than welcome to use those. Like those are good. There's some really good stories in there.
Yeah.
If you want, you can do personal stories. I love personal stories just personally because you know them. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to practice them. If you get nervous, you don't have to remember. Like they are yours. Like they're literally just telling a friend a story. Like that's why I love saying personal stories. But if you don't have one, you know, go out and use other people's stories. Use the stories in the books.
A good storyteller is going to bring you into the story, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, so I think that being able to set up the story and give you like the environment that they're in. That's what I've noticed is like you could just say you could talk about some war hero or something like that and how he saved these many lives. But if you give kind of the context of like it was 1942 and it was a dark night and like so you're using descriptions to bring people into the story. I feel like that's always really powerful.
The description, the details are so powerful, right? It was night, he was walking on dirt, like just little descriptions that get people in those moments. I mean, so with stories, yeah, I mean, people are naturally going to want to go there, so give them those details and then they'll fill in the blank. You don't need to say every little thing, but just give them little details as you're telling the story, right?
So that's something I like to do is this is just one method would be to ask the people to pretend like they're in the story. Like imagine if you had right, and then you go on and tell the story from their perspective. What would it actually be like to be in that story? And I think that helps. It engages the imagination. It also engages the emotions because you're thinking, man, what would it feel like to be in that war, to have people shooting at me? I'm just using an example of a war story or something like that.
Yeah.
So try and put the people in the place of the main.
Yeah, even the setup, right? Like, hey, I want you to imagine this. Or, one thing I always say is, I don't know if you've ever had this situation. Like I don't know why I say that, but like, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation, or I don't know if you've ever, so it makes people question, like, have I ever been in that situation?
Right.
Or have I ever known anybody? And even if they haven't, they're like, I haven't, but, I'm interested now. Like, there's something that captivates me now. You asked me a question. Again, going back to questions. But, so good storytelling. Another, there's 9 of you guys, for the most part of the officers. See who has the best storytelling gifts. Like, it's some people do have a gift and like a strength in storytelling. And that person maybe should come out and tell the story and use their gifts and their strengths. But just, and also make sure, here's the one thing with stories is make sure that there's a point to the story. I tend to be guilty of this sometimes. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm going to tell the story because it's funny. And it's okay, sometimes you need to entertain, right? But there needs to be that education as well component to it.
Yeah.
Like, what was the point of that story? Like, why did you tell me that entertaining story? Like, what should I learn from it? I think being clear about that at the end,
Yeah.
and not just assuming that people are gonna get it, because you're gonna tell people a story. It's like the skit. They might pick out on things that you didn't really weren't intending for them to get from.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
There's what other ways? Other ways are just videos. You could show videos from presentation. You could do just main points, pictures. Those are the things. And then lastly is the call to action, right? Like definitely telling them like, look, this is like literally at the end. You can tell them that 5 second like this is what I want you to get, just in case like they didn't follow along and get it, or just to stamp it at the end like, hey, this is the final thing. This, say your little tag word there. I think it's so important, and also call them to act, right? To do something, to think a different way, to believe something different, to buy into your challenge.
Yeah. I think one just a powerful principle is that you retain. I don't know what the statistic is, but like maybe 90% better when you teach somebody what you learned.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of your presentation, one idea too is to ask them to teach basically what was the main point that you learned today, what was the main thing, for them to actually verbalize that and share that with a partner. They are going to remember that so much more. I think you're the same way, I'm the same way, is that if I teach something, then I remember it for much longer. So that could be one way to also end off your presentation, is ask them to teach it to one another.
Yeah, and one thing that I've done is the one word, which I've started recently doing this, the one word response. So give me one word that describes most of the things you've learned today. To give, encourage.
Yeah.
Like just, in that way, again, especially for some of the students that we work with, that English isn't their first language, like it's useful, and then that way they don't feel intimidated to share, at least one word. So that's another gift, just another technique.